This is our third and final session of looking at the Lincoln Miracle, and it's a real pleasure to have Ed joining us for the first hour this morning. We really appreciate it. We have a whole bunch of questions for you, as you've seen that we passed along to you. But just a brief introduction. As everybody knows, Ed is the author of two critically acclaimed books about Lincoln, The Lincoln Miracle Inside the Republican Convention That Changed History, and his first Lincoln book, Every Drop of Blood, The Momentous Second Inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. Ed has the distinction and also, I'm sure, the distinct pleasure of being a historian and specialist in America's two greatest pastimes, not only Lincoln, but baseball. His two earlier books on baseball were The Summer of Beer and Whiskey and 59 in 84, a chronicle of a pitcher who won 59 games in 1884, back in the early days of Major League Baseball. So Ed, real pleasure to have you with us from Wilmington, North Carolina this morning. I thought I would begin actually by turning it back to John and letting John ask the first question.
Great. Oh, I can't hear John.
John's on mute. John?
Here we go.
Okay. Actually, before you do that, John, I forgot to ask Ed if you wanted to say just a few preliminary remarks about how you came to write the book and anything else that's germane.
Well, I came to write the book because I just loved the story. I mean, Lincoln came out of nowhere and he would be totally forgotten today, I think, if he hadn't won that convention. And the more I looked at that convention, the more it seemed to me a miracle he actually won that thing. Everything had to come in place perfectly for him to win that nomination. So I thought that was just a marvelous story, and all the politics. And I was a journalist for 41 years, so I love a good story, and I love covering political maneuvers. So that made it a very fun project for me.
Let me ask quickly, had you ever covered any national conventions as a reporter?
Yes, I covered a couple of national conventions. I was at the one in Atlanta where Dukakis was nominated, but of course they're very, very different from the 19th century conventions. They're all just a big show for TV. So but I've covered politics at every level, from local board of selectmen all up to Congress and the White House. I was at press conferences and so forth at the White House. So I feel like I got a good grounding in that, and understood some of the players here and what they were trying to do.
And as those of us from New England know, there's nothing as down and dirty as Rhode Island politics.
Yeah. Lincoln Steffens called it a state for sale and cheap. So that's Rhode Island.
That's good. So, John, first question.
And I'm going to jump around this list a little bit. Let's take the second one first. What was the most challenging aspect of researching the 1860 convention?
Just looking for firsthand accounts of it. I always like to go back to stuff as raw as you can get. The people who were there, the people commenting during the time they were there, the letters going back and forth, the telegrams and all that stuff. So I just wanted to piece together all of that I could. So I just started looking everywhere I could and following leads and other published accounts. And, but I was absolutely astonished that nobody had written this book before. I mean, there's something like 20,000 books published about Lincoln. There's been really no one about the convention itself. There's been that election season, and certainly the convention's been incorporated in other books, but I thought, I love this, what they call micro history, where you just go into a very short period and really dig into the topic. And And I thought this lent itself to that.
Mm.
So
And that leads to the fifth question here. What do you think you learned about Lincoln during this project?
I just I learned what I knew already, that Lincoln was a very crafty, skilled politician. He understood the lay of the land, but even he was blown away by what happened at this convention. I mean, he plotted what his people were going to do, and they executed that. But I don't think he expected how sudden his rise would be at this convention and how well he would do.
Hmm.
So it's I always feel like it's a total privilege to have spent, you know,
Mm.
the last decade every day in the company of Lincoln, and I'm working on another book about Lincoln. But you just realize what this guy went through and how brilliant he was and what a just man he was, and also how conniving he was and ambitious.
But
So
he never
that
shaped
makes,
events. Events shaped him.
well, he's kind of right about that. I mean, events did shape him. I mean, he couldn't predict everything that was coming down the path, and he was very fatalistic about it, you know. Fatalism runs right through the core of his being, and he just but he also worked very hard to manipulate events as far as he could.
That gets to the first question about your conclusion in the book that the deified post-assassination Lincoln was the real revealed Lincoln. How do you assess that Lincoln allowed others to deal with his behalf, allowing credible deniability, shrewd deals, and the apparent use of people who believed they had been his mere tools, like Judd and Du Bois? How much
Yeah.
do you need to forgive adhering to a man who accomplished such great good, but at what collateral cost? How would you address his modern era critics?
Uh, yeah, there was was it the National Park Service a couple of years ago said put out this tweet: should Lincoln be taken off his pedestal? And I just replied to that. Uh, if anybody belongs on a pedestal, Lincoln does. I mean, give me somebody else. And it's ridiculous. I think Lincoln, it was crafty. He knew who he was sending to that convention. He knew David Davis's personality, that he would take charge and do things in his name. I don't think he was completely doing plausible deniability when he said, "Don't make deals in my name," because Lincoln understood very well that this was a new party that is and he spent a lot of time as president. He understood as president he would have to shape the government in a way that would be reasonably competent and very loyal to him. And so when he said to Davis, make no deals in my name during the convention, I don't think he was being completely conniving and double dealing. But of course, Davis said Lincoln ain't here and put the message in his pocket. Always loved that story. Um, so, but a lot of these complaints about all these deals made at the convention, that's politics. That's what has happened throughout our entire history. It's not all of a sudden Lincoln's this bad guy for his people making deals at the convention. This is the way politics has always worked. So,
So your answer to the question is not just no, but hell no, isn't
well,
it?
I think you got to put things in perspective of well, I hate this approach to tear down Lincoln and the founders by applying pseudo modern standards to them. It's you look at the context in which they're operating, and by that measure, Lincoln is probably the most noble guy you can find in the 19th century in politics. He maintained a very solid position. He didn't veer from it, and he made deals, but that was the way you got ahead politically. And even he didn't want all the deals that Davis made. He was appalled by, Davis's promise to give Simon Cameron the Treasury Department. I mean, that was absolutely absurd. He said this guy stinks in the nostrils of the American people, and how can I give him this job? And Lincoln had to work a long time before he came around to meeting that deal they made at the convention.
Ed, can I ask, following up that, Lincoln offers Cameron the Treasury first. How did Cameron end up at war? Do you know
Well,
the story? What happened?
Lincoln didn't offer him the Treasury. The Davis did.
Davis did, yeah.
That's the deal he made.
Yeah.
Uh, Lincoln met with a series of uh, Pennsylvania so-called Republicans who bombarded him with meetings in Springfield, either advocating for Cameron or saying this guy is the biggest
Hmm.
crook you could imagine. So Lincoln had to deal with a very divided Republican Party in Pennsylvania, and he sort of had to juggle all these positions, and he eventually gave him war as presumably the least destructive operation you could give him, which turned out to be not exactly true, since we
No.
entered the Civil War, and he was famous for making corrupt deals. So it was he promised the Interior Department to Smith, who had no executive ability at all. Um, but was a patronage plum, and he just couldn't get around to giving giving Cameron treasury.
Right.
It was just too filled with potential for corruption.
Mhm.
Another deal-making aspect would be question 4. I'm sorry, do you have something else,
So,
Jeffrey?
No, go ahead, John.
Question 4 draws on William C. Harris's book, Lincoln's Rise to the Presidency, which adds other details about Lincoln's preparation to run for office and the planning the Illinois Republicans did for the convention. An
right.
example would be securing the Corwine letter right after the Illinois convention, agreeing that Lincoln was the best non-radical candidate and Ohio would rally for him. Further, Davis was not a loose cannon in Chicago. Lincoln and Davis had developed a deep understanding of the necessary strategy that differed with others like Judd. Do you consider the most prominent reasons for Lincoln's victory to be Davis's success or Weed's failure? Did Seward still have a chance when the convention week started?
Well, I think Seward had a great chance when the convention week started, but I think this Lincoln strategy was extremely effective because, as I lay out in the book, the political tides going on, people were very nervous about the John Brown raid and very nervous about the risk of civil war, and voters associated Seward with radicalism. They didn't swing voters would be very nervous voting for Seward, and Lincoln's people made that case. I mean, and Lincoln was effectively exactly the same place Seward was, but he was not as well known. I mean, it's so extraordinary how the people meeting in that convention, I was very struck looking at this. This is politics and this is reality, but they weren't trying to pick who would be the best executive of the country in a major crisis. They were just trying to go for somebody who would get them the most potential for jobs, and get elected, get the most Republicans down ballot elected. That's all they cared about, really. So Lincoln's people were able to make a case. He was less radical than Seward, but he would still appeal to the base. Um, he was not offensive to German voters the way that Bates was, for instance. And they made a very, and his life story would play well with the log cabin. So they made a very effective case for him at that convention. Um, I don't think Davis was a loose cannon at all. Well, he was a I take it back. Davis was very pragmatic guy and he got things done. And that was his role at the convention. And he even, I think he, as I said, Lincoln ain't here. He even went beyond what Lincoln told him to do to secure the nomination. But they were very struck early in the convention that, oh my God, Seward's not as strong as everybody thought he was. People were desperately looking for an alternative. And that gave them a lot of confidence that they could really push Lincoln hard.
So you come out a Davis fan. Was it a Weed failure?
No, well, it was more a failure of the political tides running against
Mhm.
Seward. We did a lot of brilliant things. I mean, he brought out 10,000 people to scream at the wigwam for Seward and to send a really strong message. Look, this is who the party wants.
You created such
Uh,
powerful visuals for that. That was terrific.
yes, thank you. And Weed was a very smart guy. He was really shrewd. He had his people shouting. He had the parades. He was plying everybody with liquor. He was making promises to them about financial support for their campaigns and so forth. Um, he did a lot that was really smart, and he tried to make deals with Lincoln. He tried to put Lincoln on the ticket as vice president. Um, you know, he the one thing people said about him was he was a little too strong. I mean, the New York delegation was a little too strong. They were very arrogant and they gave off kind of an odious appearance because it was so uh, political and kind of corrupt in New York. So that gave off somewhat a bad odor to some of the more reformist members of the delegates. So that was a problem. But I think Weed is underrated. I think he was quite good, but he just ran into
Mm.
this whole thing. That's why I say it's a miracle. All these different uh, issues perfectly lined up for Lincoln at the timing of the convention and all. So I tried to give Weed his due in the book because I kind of like him.
Scott, you want to follow up?
Yeah, and I just had a quick question. Does you talked about the things that Weed had done brought 10,000 people. I mean, it seems like Davis, though, and the people really used the home court advantage, so to speak, in Chicago to help mitigate that, both on a larger scale like that, also with the smaller scale of knowing local printers, local transportation, all
That's
those things.
right.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Uh, yeah, I think there was a tremendous home field advantage for Lincoln's people. Um, and it's so funny how the Republican National Committee chose Chicago specifically because it was sort of a neutral ground. There was no serious presidential candidate from Illinois. And they did no printers. I think they did print up counterfeit tickets and get the Lincoln people in those seats before the Seward people showed up on Friday, which is always one of my favorite stories from this convention. And also Lincoln's, the people in Illinois could afford to get up to Chicago and help out. And that's something that it was very costly for Seward to do from New York. So Lincoln was able to run his campaign on a shoestring. But, as I say, uh, Lincoln did not really emerge until the wee hours of Thursday night, Friday morning. He didn't really emerge as the alternative to Seward. And Seward had won a whole series of test votes on Thursday. And he really looked poised to get the nomination. I mean, there's the famous story of Greeley popping his head in at when they're the the swing states were meeting to discuss who would be their alternative to Seward, and they hadn't resolved on anybody after all this time. And he went back and reported that Seward's going to win the nomination because they couldn't agree on somebody to run counter to Seward. So it was a very it's a dicey thing that Lincoln won this thing. And we tend to view history, okay, it had to happen that way, but I don't think it really did have to happen that way. I think it worked in place perfectly for Lincoln because his people worked hard that last night to make the deals they needed.
David Kent.
Hi, Ed.
David,
to follow up what you're saying, the Lincoln was the kind of the alternative, the less radical person, but didn't Lincoln? Let me just sort of preface it. Lincoln, we all know he was kind of a bean counter. He would count votes, and they knew what happened in 1856 with Fremont and which states they needed to capture, the Republicans needed to capture in order to win the election. And Lincoln did all these calculations beforehand in order to figure out, well, I have a better chance than Seward because this state doesn't like Seward and this state doesn't like Seward, or Chase doesn't like Chase. Did anybody else do those calculations? There must have been the other candidates, and the delegates must have had an understanding of which states they needed to win in the general election. And that would sway those state delegations into, picking somebody that was better positioned to win those.
well, I think the Bates people did that, certainly. Bates had a lot of support. He had, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Blair, the Blair family. He had the Blair family behind him. He had a number of people behind him, and he went into that convention counting the votes and thinking, I've got this nomination in hand. And it wasn't until the Germans really kicked up a fuss that Bates went down. So, and even Lincoln thought Bates was a possibility to win. I think, I think even though they could count the votes, you can't really tell ahead of time what's going to happen at that convention. You don't know how strong Seward is going in there. You don't know how people around the country are exactly going to react. And you're right, Lincoln was a brilliant vote counter, and he knew after the first ballot, I better go next to a telegraph machine because this thing is Seward doesn't have this thing. He knew that after the first ballot, which is Seward didn't know that himself, or he professed not to know it himself. He thought, okay, we did well on the first ballot, we'll push it through on the next ballot. Lincoln knew immediately, oh my God, Seward's going down. He didn't get enough votes. So.
Thank you, John Swallows.
Well, I was really stunned at how much the railroads drove so many people could come. 10,000 in the hall and 20,000 outside. Did that happen to a similar degree with the Democratic conventions? And
I don't think
obviously
it did.
there's no TV or internet back then. Railroads make travel a lot cheaper than stagecoaches, etc.
Yeah, not in Charleston. They didn't have the railroads.
They didn't have yeah, I was going to say that, Carl. They didn't have the railroad infrastructure in Charleston. Chicago was connected by more rail lines than any country on the globe in 1860. It's quite amazing how much it was a central location even then. And as I write in the book about the railroad companies had sort of a race to Chicago to promote themselves. And they did some very dangerous stuff getting people out to Chicago, having this great race from Buffalo. So yeah, I think the railroads had a big impact on this convention. It brought a ton of people there. And the Republicans were kind of this populist movement that the Democrats weren't, with the wide awakes and all that stuff.
Right.
And the young people sort of flocked to this party. They thought it was finally we're going to stand up to the old fuddy Democrats and the Whigs. Here's a party that's really on the move and really stands for something. And so that flavor really got into the convention.
Plus, Lincoln was known by the railroads better than the other candidates because he'd been a railroad attorney.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
Scott?
Where did they all stay?
I was just going to make a quick comment. I find it ironic that Stephen Douglas had so much to do with the route of the railroad too through Illinois. When you talk about how that really helped build Lincoln, but Douglas was the one that got a lot of those railroads.
The Lincoln Miracle, all this stuff came together that nobody could have really predicted.
You make that point brilliantly. Now, Ed, this gripping read is only 500 pages. What issues or questions of importance that you would have explored further with time and resources?
Oh boy, I don't know. I've moved on to the next one, so I don't really go back in time and think. I might have done more on the 1856 convention and how that influenced this one, but I like this approach of really digging into that moment and really understanding what people had to say about that moment. And I would have loved to have more eyewitness accounts but I had plenty of them.
Yeah, you did.
So
Yep.
so it is especially the newspaper accounts were wonderful. And there's so much out there now. It's such a gift to be writing about this now with all the stuff online. It's just amazing.
Ed, let me ask the question somewhat differently, and maybe you have the same answer, but is there anything you learned after finishing the book that you really wish you would put into the book?
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think so. Thank God. But yeah. I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a nice thing about writing about something that happened 150 years ago is there's not a lot of new stuff coming in, It's just, and we found most things.
Yeah, but you never know what'll pop up, It's there sometimes there's little documents that pop up that really change your perspective on how something happened. So
yeah.
But so far so good, I guess.
We combine questions 6 and 8 here. Who was the most surprising character you discovered? The question 8 is similar, I think. The book shows the impact of unconscious instruments, individuals who made the magic and Lincoln nomination miracle happen. The question is, do you have any aha moments in seeing how the alchemy of specific people, their quirks and traits of being who they were at the right place at the right time makes this difference in changing history? Surprising people or moments for you in this book?
I mean, I had so much fun getting to know David Davis. I mean, to me, he's just the way he stubbornly persists and stuff. He was even, Lincoln was so much more cautious than Davis. Lincoln, and why, justly so, wisely so. But Davis just said, we're going to get this done, And it's so, he shows up and they don't even have a hotel room for the headquarters for the campaign. And that's how disorganized they were. To me, that's really striking because those hotels were all full. He had to bribe a family to leave so he could put up his sign on the door, Lincoln headquarters. And just the way he immediately stepped in. No, Lincoln didn't make him his campaign manager. He just sent him there. And he stepped in the whole thing. I loved getting to meet him. And I liked getting to meet Weed too. I'd read about Weed my whole life, but just looking at him more, he's a touching figure because he loved Seward. He thought Seward was a great American who could lead this country with wisdom and restraint during the faith to his beliefs during this great crisis. And he just wept on the floor when Lincoln won the nomination. So I found Weed a fun character to meet.
Takes us right to the last first question, number 7. I have to say that in our previous discussions of this, most people were interested in your empathetic assessment of Thurlow Weed. No one's ever really heard that aspect before. How did you come to your conclusions that he wasn't such a bad person? Clearly, Horace Greeley did not agree.
Yeah, Greeley's somebody I like less the more I get to know him. But he's endearing too in a way. He's kind of a kook, really. I mean, and you can see why Weed couldn't trust him, why they had to break with him. And Greeley, Greeley wanted to be lieutenant governor of New York. He wanted to get into politics. He wanted to have some actual power beyond the power of the pen. So I just love that element of the story. That's another part of the miracle that it all came together perfectly. That Greeley was so pissed off at they not only passed him over for lieutenant governor, but they put his arch enemy, the editor of the New York Times, Henry Raymond, into the position. So he felt very betrayed by these two people, Seward and Weed, he had linked forces with for so many decades. And so I just love him coming to the convention and telling everybody Seward can't win this thing. And he had a huge effect. I
like to say half jokingly, but only half jokingly, that Seward lost the nomination in 1854 when Greeley and Weed had their rupture. That it came to bite Seward in the ass 6 years later.
It did, but I think he still could have won that convention. I mean, he won the test votes on Thursday. He was very close to winning the nomination when they had that. They said, "Oh, we want to go. Let's have a break and go to dinner." So instead of, and then they had to, they didn't have the tally sheets in hand to be prepared for the voting. So that gave Lincoln's men another night. I guess if I could have learned anything, I wanted to know why they didn't have the tally sheets in hand, because that certainly helped Seward's opponents. But I never got to the bottom of that.
For want of a nail, a shoe was lost.
That's right.
Hi,
Just wrapping up the Weed discussion, though.
Wrapping it up, we did a reorganization of the questions. So the person who submitted the questions on Seward that were listed originally in the second half, we'd like to cover that with Professor Achorn if we could. So before, when John Swallow gets his question in, I just wanted to make sure that we cover all the questions that were submitted for the author.
Sure.
Debbie, I thank you for the promotion. I'm not a professor, though. I'm just a ink-stained wretch. I'm a former journalist who writes history.
We know about our journalists here with Ed here.
Do you think it's fair to conclude that the fact that we don't know as much about Weed was more a result of Greeley being so prolific in writing and giving his opinion. We know more from Greeley than we know from anybody else. So you've discovered an aspect of Weed that we wouldn't otherwise have discovered. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate from reading your book. Well done on that.
Thank you.
John Swallow.
Well, you know,
John?
Yeah. How much did Mary Todd Lincoln get emotionally involved or whatever in what was going on in Chicago? Because I mean, she's knowing some of what's going on, just like Lincoln.
well, my overall view of Mary Lincoln is that Lincoln would not have been president without her, not by
Right.
a long shot. She, for one thing, she made his life so miserable that he left home for 6 months a year and worked on the circuit. So he got to know everybody in Illinois, in central Illinois, and they were absolutely vital for him at the convention. She also kept pressing him. He flirted with the idea of going back to the legislature. She said, no, you've been a congressman, you've got to move on. There was some talk of him accepting the vice presidency at the convention. She said, no, you're not going to accept the vice presidency. She was very firm on him. She believed in him for president when nobody else did, including Lincoln professed that he didn't believe he was fit for the presidency. And he even laughed to a reporter. Can you imagine a sucker like me as president? And Mary believed in him as president. So she really pushed him hard to shoot for the very top.
Janet Saras.
Yes. Very early in the book, you quote Davis. I think he was talking to Herndon. And he says, Lincoln had no spontaneity nor emotional nature, no strong emotional feelings for any person, mankind, or thing. He never thanked me for anything I did. So it seems like Davis kind of soured on Lincoln later on in life, or do you have other evidence for that, or do you think this is kind of a Herndon twist on things?
I think Davis is basically right about Lincoln's personality. He had this strange coldness, and he did not go around thanking people a lot for helping him. Really, he was just sort of in his own world. And this is what Mary noticed about him and was very frustrating to her. He was perpetually in his own world. And he thought things through on his own. He didn't share, he wasn't very spontaneous about sharing his, to the regret of historians who have to just piece this together, what he really thought or felt. He didn't express his feelings. He didn't. So I think that was something of what Davis was talking about. But there's so much there to admire despite that. And I think Davis greatly admired Lincoln, despite whatever personality quirks he might have had, because he was an honest guy. He was a noble guy. He was fair. He was devoted to people and to his mission. And I think Davis admired that very much. He was very unlike the other politicians in the 19th century who were endlessly grubbing and conniving and not that much concerned about maintaining values, perhaps, and serving the people and respecting the voters. So I think he saw Lincoln as an unusually decent man.
David?
Yeah, I think by the time of the convention, Lincoln thought he could win the nomination. When do you think Lincoln started started thinking that he could have a chance at the nomination, and then if it's different, when he thought he could actually win the nomination, leading up to the convention.
Yeah, I don't think he went in thinking he could win it. I haven't seen evidence for that.
Do you think he just went there and figuring, well, let me give it a shot, and
Well,
maybe I'll end
yeah,
up being vice president or something?
right. Or this is, look, he's very interested in the Senate seat, and that could be coming up in a few years, and so he wants the Illinois Republican Party solidly behind him, and so he goes in as a presidential candidate representing the state of Illinois. And I think he knew very early on. The telegrams started flying to him after that first weekend. I write about Davis arriving there on Friday, and by Monday they're all telling him, look, don't be nervous, don't get your hopes up, but I think you have as good a chance here as anyone. And he got multiple messages to that effect. Look, this thing's wide open. You have a real chance here. But they kept telling him not to be nervous. I always thought that was kind of funny, that Lincoln might be nervous about it.
In Denver, we have Reverend Mike Bergman.
Yes, in the previous conversation, just before this one, you're talking about Lincoln's temperament. But then on page 352, a neighbor, James Gorley, and he says that Lincoln, the homely, smart, good-natured lawyer who was away half the year, et cetera, the country entertainer who told knee-slapping jokes around pot-bellied stoves, et cetera. It seems like Lincoln was a complex character. He had his bright side as well as his more quiet side.
That's a good point. That's putting it mildly. Complex character. He was racked with depression throughout his life. Davis actually thought he told all those jokes as a way to pull himself out of his depression. He really enjoyed making people laugh, and that was sort of gave him an escape valve from thinking too deeply and being too depressed about various things in his life. And this, I mean, you got to look at the context too of the society at the time, how hard everything was, how often people died, how Lincoln lost his mother when he was 9 years old. So I think he was a very terribly scarred human being. I really think his early life just brutally affected him, and then he was able to rise above that, but the scars stayed with him his whole life.
Ed, you had mentioned in the book that Michael Burlingame helped you with some of this. Does he share your opinion on Mary's necessity in Lincoln becoming president?
I'm not. He's very tough on Mary Lincoln, as you know. But I think he does understand. I think he, if anyone would know, it'd be Michael. He knows everything about Lincoln. It's quite extraordinary. And I think he recognizes that Mary played a huge role in pushing him forward, because that's in the historical record. She really did push him. And I think he shares my view that one of the ways she made him successful was to drive him out of the house by being so miserable. he It's a very strange thing, but I think I'm more like Lincoln brought on some of this himself than Michael is. I think Lincoln must have been a very hard person to be around. He was always in his own world. He was not emotive. He was not romantic in any way, in any form. He must have been hard to have around the house. Mary didn't like the way he shuffled around. He didn't lift his feet. He still had some of the mannerisms of his upbringing. And he must have been a difficult person to be around.
Bill Walsh.
Yeah, I'm glad we came back to the aspect of his personality. I'm thinking of Speed and his relationship with speed as a counter indication to his emotionality, ability to talk about his feelings. He didn't talk about them to everyone, of course, but he did pick and choose. I think he was grateful to Speed for the support that his mother, Speed's mother, and Speed gave him during his emotional trials. And when he broke up with Mary, he certainly talked about his feelings about Mary at the time and how confused he was. And so I think, there's a difference between different types of people. He's a complex guy. And politically, he was going to keep his cards close to his chest. But he did open up to a few people. And I think he expressed gratitude to many people, but not necessarily to those who helped him politically. With Davis, I just thought he had, with his appointments, I thought he had a balancing act to do. And he was very clever about that. That was another strategy. He wasn't going to pick people and give everyone from Indiana or Illinois opportunities. He wanted to spread that around so that he would have, more support in many places. But I do think he showed emotions at times, and occasionally expressed anger, sometimes toward, the famous Meade letter that he filed away. And all of that. So that's my comment. Any reaction to that?
No, Bill, I think you raise an extremely good point. I think he was more open with Speed than anybody. But even him, he was open with him, but it passed after a time. We still don't know what he was thinking and feeling during the war, during the period when he was most well known in national life. So, but I think you raise a really good point. He was close. I think he was closer to Speed than anyone. And,
I'm doing a little research on his religious thinking in connection with his Niagara essay, the incomplete essay, where he mentions Jesus Christ on the cross, which I think is very telling, and it's been overlooked. But Speed refers to an example of his religious thinking in the White House, and and it's at the end of the first term. Two women are in the office at the end of the day, and they want to get him, Lincoln, that is, to pardon their loved ones who were draft dodgers in Western Pennsylvania. And he says at the end of that, he says to Speed, "That was the best thing I did all day." He was able to release them because the war was, being won at that point. I don't think he would have released them otherwise. But again, it's just another example of how he talked to Speed in ways that he didn't talk to other people. And that was a White House visit.
he did talk to people about how doing good made him feel good. He did talk about that. I think you're dead on looking at his religious beliefs. I think that's been an underplayed aspect of his character. We all, look at his early skepticism and his, when he first ran for Congress, his sort of evasive language when he defends himself. But I think he became more and more hooked into a sense of fatalism and a sense that God is in command of everything, and we can only do the best we can within this great force that's sweeping us along. And I tried to write about that a little in Every Drop of Blood, which was about
Oh,
the day surrounding the second inaugural. I think he really came to a feeling, a strong religious feeling. He always, the other thing is he always loved the Bible. He found it a source of incredible wisdom. Obviously, he loved the language of the King James Bible because it's so reflected in his writing and in his political ideas. But yeah, I think he came to think more and more that there is a God who has a direct role in human life here, and obviously something like the Civil War would make you want to look to a higher power and think, how can we make sense of this horrible tragedy? So,
Ed, we have people that want to hear you comment on Seward, his role during the convention and afterwards. And here are some of those example questions. How likely was it that Lincoln could have won without Seward's campaigning and support?
I think Lincoln would have won anyways, but it was very important to bring New York and its money and its machine onto Lincoln's side. Seward went out and campaigned late in the campaign. Well, not late. He went out and campaigned hard, but it was sort of like all about Seward. It's a very interesting thing. He didn't mention Lincoln much at all. He went out and it seemed to be like Seward mania. They're just focusing on how great he was and what. So Seward's a very interesting guy. I think he was very cold toward Lincoln. I write in the book about that scene in Springfield where he wouldn't come visit Lincoln at his house. Lincoln had to go to the railroad station, and they had to fight his way onto the car through the crowds and get into the car. And Seward started talking with him and then just sat down and turned his back on him. Essentially, it was a total snub. And Seward maintained his distance from Lincoln after the convention, and after the election. He sort of played coy about being in the cabinet. He wasn't sure he wanted to serve with this guy. He obviously did not respect Lincoln at the start. He thought he was a little Illinois lawyer who didn't have the experience. He didn't have the subtlety of mind. He thought he was ill prepared for the presidency. And I think a month into the presidency, he was still feeling that way. His famous April 1st letter to Lincoln, really laying out, really blasting Lincoln for not having a policy and all that. He only, it took him a long time to understand, wait a minute, this guy really knows what he's doing. And his mind is subtle and supple, and he's a strong executive. It took him forever to understand that.
What do you think the key factors were that led him to that conclusion?
About Lincoln?
Yes.
Just, I mean, the way up to Fort Sumter, Seward was desperately trying to get Lincoln not to pull out of Fort Sumter. Just forget it. Get out of there. But after that, when he had to confront this the country hurtling toward war, he came to understand, oh, Lincoln's really on top of this stuff. He really knows what he's doing. And before that, it was all Seward was working behind his back, I think, trying to pursue this peace strategy that Lincoln was not sold on yet. Lincoln and never would be sold on. So I think Seward's an interesting figure, very, very strong ego, very strong sense that he had the experience, executive experience Lincoln lacked, until he got into the war. And then he started to, it's one of the, to me, that's one of the great arcs of history. And you see this with Lincoln. People start off having a very grim view of him, and then they come around to see this guy is really something special. And you know, Frederick Douglass had that arc, and Seward had that arc. They came around to see how special Lincoln was. And Lincoln, for his part, didn't take offense with all the stuff Seward was doing to sort of insult him and demonstrate he didn't really think that highly of him. I mean, that April 1 letter, if this was the Trump, he would have fired him, I think, in a minute. But Lincoln, you know, sort of wrote out an answer to Seward, and then I don't think he ever delivered it to Seward. He went in person and talked to Seward. And as a result, Seward was his most trusted advisor during the war. He did, you know, really great work for the United States. And that's Lincoln. He's, Yavin said his greatest strength as president was his experience dealing with difficult people. So he was able to put up with difficult people, and that was his greatest strength.
The last question, let's go to David Kent.
I was just curious what your thinking is about Seward, in the sense that even though he didn't really respect Lincoln early on, and it took him a while to warm up to him, but he did go out there and campaign more for the Republican Party, and
Yes.
like said, maybe more for himself. Do you think he was somebody, you think the decision to go out there was like just vanity? Was a power play on his part, or did he have a genuine sense of duty to the party and the country?
Yeah, I think it's both of those things, David. I think he did have a sense of duty to the Republican Party and to the country. He was terribly worried what would happen if the Democrats won. But I think it was also a vanity project. He wanted to, he loved the attention. He wanted to keep his name up there. He wanted to be as powerful as he could be and as influential as he could be in the party. And this was one way to do it. Mm-hmm. And really, the crowds loved him. They thought very highly of him, and they turned out in huge numbers to see him. He was the leading figure of the Republican Party, really, not Lincoln. And it's quite amazing how that flipped around.
He could really have damaged the chances of Republicans winning the election if he had stayed out of it, not said anything, and even worse, if he had been antagonistic to Lincoln and the party.
Yeah, he didn't say anything nice about Lincoln, but he didn't. You're right. He didn't sulk in his tent. He went out there and worked for the party.
Yeah, he basically spoke up for the party and principles, as opposed to Lincoln specifically.
Yeah, that's why, you know, I feel towards Seward as sort of, you know, what I feel towards Weed, kind of. He's a flawed figure in a way, but he was deeply committed to what he believed in. But he was also an egomaniac, you know, but that's the nature of politics.
Edward Achorn, thank you very much for being with us this morning to discuss your book, The Lincoln Miracle.
Can we do a screenshot?
We're gonna, our last
Wait a minute,
books.
Wait a minute, hold on.
There are going to be two shots. One where you're going to feature Ed by himself, and then we're going to get a group shot with everybody. But
okay,
our copies of his book. Little tradition of ours. And I need Debbie. You going to take this?
Yeah, you ready?
Oh, good. Would you capture this? Great.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. All right. Oh, that looks good. All right.
That was fun.
Got that.
Oh, that's great.
One more
Thank you so
with-
much for reading it. And these were the toughest and best questions I've ever gotten.
One more
Be
shot.
careful. Be careful, Ed, with your next book. We'll have you back. We'll try to have some confidence.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
How many?
Look at the camera one more time.
One more? Okay. Let me get the new. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, Mr. Achorn, how many have been purchased since it was published? It's still going on, obviously.
Yeah, no, it's done very well. I don't have an exact number, but it's one of the best-selling books by Grove Atlantic, and it's done well.
When's the next one coming out?
Not for, let's see. I've got a deadline of finishing it this December, but it's not going to come out till the year after next year. So whatever that is, 2027.
27, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
So
Thank you, Ed, very much.
thank you, Jeff. This
you.
is
Thank you so
real
much.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
What
Good to
we'll
see you, Ed.
do is we'll send you the compilation of all the questions. You just saw the ones that we set up for you.
Oh, Debbie, thank
Have a
you.
whole set from the first part, second, and the third part. So we'll send that on to you with the pictures. So thanks so much.
That's great,
And-
Debbie.
And,
Thank
and
you.
my final question would be, is there a book about Lincoln and baseball in your future?
I always was bummed out that he was playing ball when he got word of the nomination, supposedly, but it wasn't baseball; it was
Yeah.
handball.
Handball.
So
And
I want more baseball Lincoln connections, but I don't have them.
They may not exist. Yeah. Good.
All right.
Stay well, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks
Pleasure.
much.
This is the best use of Zoom.
Isn't it?
Thank you.